brothers, humour, irony and tragedy. G'day to all you lovely people and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to talk about Midnight Tides, the 5th book in Malazan the Book of the Fallen series by Steven Erikson. I am now halfway. Before I get started with that, I wanted to say a few things. One is thank you to all of you who come and watch these videos, and to those of you who comment as well. I absolutely love talking about these books, and I really do appreciate all of you for your insights and contributions. Sorry, my puppy is tearing up one of her toys. Yeah, so it'll be clean up after this. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I don't watch any reviews. I don't watch any content that relates to Malazan. I don't watch interviews with the author. I don't read any articles regarding the books. That is so that I can give you my raw and unfiltered thoughts about this series without being influenced by other people's opinions. At the moment, I'm just occasionally watching a video on, say, one of the books that I've already brought out a video on, because I do find it fascinating how different reviewers focus on other issues that I may not have focused on. It also gives me more insight into the books, but that is only after my videos have come out. But keep the recommendations coming. I am definitely going to watch a lot more Malazan content, but it has to be once I finish all the books. And the last thing I wanted to speak about before I get onto the review proper is about the Crippled God. This was actually something I was intending to talk about even before I read Midnight Tides. I've been wanting to talk about him for a while, and I think it is a male. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, and feel free to correct me if I get anything wrong in the video itself, in this one or other videos. I honestly do not mind being corrected when I get something wrong. Alright, the Crippled God. He doesn't even have a name, which bothers me. It almost dehumanizes him, makes him somewhat less. And let's just look at that name or title that he goes by, the Crippled God, which is a contradiction in terms. Usually gods are omnipotent. He clearly isn't. And this is a god that, from my recollection, was dragged into this world by accident. It wasn't intentional. So he is an alien to this world that we have been reading about throughout these books, but this world is also alien to him. It is not his home. It is not his world. And this is a character who is suffering constant pain, on top of being crippled, on top of being injured. And if that's not enough, he's also been chained. Now we are told by the gods of this world that if they did not chain this god, he will destroy this world. That's what we are told. But if Midnight Tides taught me anything, it's that histories are written by victors and they're not always accurate. So I have to wonder, is it true? Would he actually destroy this world? Or is it simply what these gods, these elder gods, are telling us? But all of these factors, the fact that he's crippled in an alien world, a strange world to him, the fact that he's chained, the fact that he's suffering constant pain, that evoked really strong feelings of sympathy in me for this character. I have to wonder, is he really the villain of the piece, the antagonist, or is that simply how he has been portrayed by other gods in this world by other characters. I should also mention that I really dislike the term crippled because of personal reasons, because I am in a wheelchair scooter, because I actually have been called crippled, because it can be used as a pejorative. It can be very offensive to people who have, say, disabilities. So I have to wonder if I am alone in feeling this intense sympathy for the crippled God. Is it just me? Is it because I also have a personal dislike of his name? I don't know, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the crippled God, without spoilers, of course, relating to future books, in the comments below. All right, let's move on to the book itself, Midnight Tides. I love that I'm halfway, and I have to confess, I have to restrain myself from just jumping into the next book immediately. But I have to admit, I think it's really beneficial for me, given that I'm making videos on these books, to take my time to think about it, to formulate my thoughts, to think about the themes that Erikson raises in each of his books. But I think if I wasn't actually reviewing all of the books, I probably would have just finished them by now, because I just want to know how it's going to end, and I love these books so much. Midnight Tides is something new yet again. We are not in Genobacchus, and we are not in Seven Cities. We are in a completely new place. World maybe. And we are also in a different timeline with new characters. There is only one character I think that we have previously met, and that is Trull Sengar, who we met in House of Chains, the Tist Edur. I actually like not knowing where I'm going to land when I open one of these books. And I don't read the blurbs for future books until I finish the one I'm reading. So it is like a Christmas present to myself, wondering, oh, where am I going to go now? In my opinion, the prologue in Midnight Tides was the best one I have read so far. I absolutely loved it. In just a few paragraphs, Steven Erikson painted this very vivid, visceral picture of the aftermath of a bloody war. The image it gave me was so powerful, and I think it set the tone for the rest of the book. There was almost this oppressive sense of dread throughout the book. There was this sense of tragedy, desolation, and then we have a terrible betrayal by the Tist Edur against the Tist Andai. I had wanted to learn what connection, if any, they had, what their history was. And it was a tragic one. What they did to their fellow soldiers was just disgusting. There is no justification for that. These are soldiers that they fought beside, and then they decided to just cut them down like that. So of course I hated Skabandari, is that right? Blood-Eye? Oh yes, I really did not like him. It was clear he was just looking for power. And Silchus, is it Silchus? Silchus Ruin. I'm sorry, some of these names are really difficult to remember. I don't know why, perhaps because of Anamanda Rake, who I really like. My sympathies lied more already with the Tist Andai than the Tist Edur, even though I loved Trull in House of Chains. But witnessing this horrible betrayal of a much smaller force, you cannot help but feel that the Edur are the villains of the piece, or at least their leader is. So that is the prologue itself. And I have to admit, I went back and read the prologue again because it was just so well written. And it also helps to kind of clarify events that occur throughout the book. Because ultimately, Midnight Tides is about a conflict between two different nations, I'm going to call them. The Tist Edur and the Letherii, or Letherii. I cannot make up my mind how to pronounce that, so I might be using both pronunciations. These are two cultures that are almost diametrically opposed to each other. We have the Tist Edur, who are stuck in the past, who are seeking to recapture their former glory, who are very bound by traditions and customs and have no real interest in material things. That's the impression we are given. On the other side, we have the Letherii, who are all about wealth, all about progress, all about money, all about debt. Very reminiscent of a capitalist society, in my opinion anyway, and expansionist as well. Seems they're never satisfied and always looking for more. So they have destroyed several cultures, several societies in their, I don't know what to call it, rampant need for more. I think it was natural for me to feel more sympathy with the Tist Edur than the Letherii, except that I had just read the prologue where the Tist Edur had betrayed their kin, the Tist Andai. So it was hard to reconcile that with what I was reading about the actual Tist Edur. And I believe what actually happened in that prologue took place quite some time before the events in the book. Now, something that Steven Erikson does so well is split my loyalties. I didn't know who to side with, the Letherii or the Tist Edur, because I loved some of the characters from both sides. By showing us the viewpoint of several characters from these two cultures, we got to see what those cultures really are like, what life is like for some, say, ordinary people in these societies, as well as the leaders in this group. You can't help but love some of these characters and want nothing bad to happen to them. Trull, who I really loved in House of Chains, was always the doomsayer in this book. And his dynamic with his brothers, all such different personalities, very familiar in siblings, very familiar in people we know. You have Fear, who is the eldest, who is the most responsible, the most stoic in some ways, who is following in the footsteps of their parents, who is a natural leader. Then you have Udinaas. I can never remember his name. He is the mage. I'd say his character I understood the least and would have liked to have seen explored more. All I knew was that he was a mage and he was a loner, pretty much. Then of course we had Trull, who is the doubter, who is questioning everything, many times to his own detriment, but who has this strong core of compassion, of kindness. If you can hear that noise in the background, that is my puppy in her little pool. I don't know what she's doing, but it's hot here, so she is cooling off. Okay. In some ways, I like Trull a lot less in this book. He was always questioning everything, doubting everything, always seemed to be the most pessimistic of all the brothers. But I admired his integrity. I admired that he didn't hesitate to stand up for what he believed in, and sometimes to his detriment. I admired his courage. Though I won't say that I learned to love him more in this book, but I think I understand him better. I just found him more approachable, more likable in House of Chains than I did in this one. Then we have Rhulad, the youngest, always trying to prove himself, arrogant, cocky. I disliked him intensely. He was so keen to prove himself, but had no impulse control, was arrogant, maybe even fearful. I gained that impression later in the book. It became obvious, I think, for me anyway, that he obviously coveted Mayan. And he was a character that I loathed. I hated him to begin with. And this is, I think, the genius of Erikson. He made me feel so much sympathy for Rhulad, more than any other in this book. And what he went through. What he went through. I'll get into Rhulad and what happened to him a little bit later. The brothers are the main characters we spend time with in Edur, other than the slaves. Udinaas. I really like this character, Udinaas. He was in some ways very accepting of his situation, and yet in other ways he resented, obviously, being a slave, being an indebted. Then, of course, there is his hopeless love for Featherwitch, who at times was really unlikable. At times. At other times, I felt she was very conflicted about her feelings for Udinaas, and that she was trying to get herself out of being an indebted. And I can't blame her for that. This whole concept of being in debt for generations is just horrific to me. Some people will never have the opportunity to get out of debt and will live in the most abject poverty, which is what we did see in the city of Letherii. I think it's Letherii. I have this inherent hatred for slavery, the concept of it, of one person owning another, and that person having no choices, whose life is dictated by someone else. And that naturally made me dislike the Edur. But in addition to having slaves, we then find out that the shadows that they use, and use is the right word, are actually enslaved Tist-Andai. Here the Tist-Edur think that these shadows are actually their ancestors, when in fact it is their enemies. Ones that they already betrayed and continue to betray by keeping as slaves as shadows. I don't think you are meant to like this culture. And whilst not everyone knew this, the leadership definitely did. Perhaps this was to make us dislike the Tist-Edur, or just to show that they're flawed, like everyone is. Because I know I certainly did not like the Letherii at all. But I'll get into that. There was always, I think, from the very beginning, this mounting sense of dread, of foreboding, that this was not going to end well, that terrible things were going to happen. I just felt this oppressive weight, especially when I read about the Tist-Edur. And sometimes it was hard to read, and every time I got to a chapter on the Letherii, I felt this relief. And as a result, I really loved the humour with the characters in Letherii. Trull and Bugg were absolutely hysterical for me. I felt I needed that. I needed that time to kind of just relax and laugh before I could face the Tist-Edur again. I think they were very necessary to lighten the mood. So we skip from the Tist-Edur to the Letherii. Got to see what their culture is like, which was so reminiscent of capitalism rampant. It all seemed to be about money, about prestige, about position, and if you had no money, then you were poor, and you would most likely be living in abject poverty, or you would be indebted for the rest of your life and for generations to come. It seemed they were completely obsessed with the accumulation of wealth and exploiting other cultures, other resources. I did not find them admirable at all as a culture. Again, flawed, just like the Edur. I found their expansionist policy in particular abhorrent. The fact that they had no qualms in actually destroying other cultures, destroying their gods, their beliefs. I found that just too reminiscent of colonialism. So perhaps that is why I took an intense dislike to the Letherii as well. Yeah. I basically decided they are as bad as each other, but in completely different ways. And ultimately, that just speaks to human nature. We are all capable of good and bad. We are capable of great things and terrible things. This is human nature, and it will always be human nature. It's an indictment on us as a species, but it's realistic. So let's talk about the Letherii. We again have brothers, 3 of them. Again, very different. There's Bryce, who is the noble knight, I guess you could call him. There is T-Hole, the genius, humorous, modest, kind character, the benevolent, I guess. And then we have Hull. Hull is, I think I could make an entire video just trying to discuss Hull because he is very complex. I'd say he was the loyal one, the fanatical one, perhaps. Because in some ways he was also very naive, who felt betrayed. And I can understand him feeling betrayed, but his actions in actually aligning with the Edur was also a betrayal of his own people. I found it really sad, tragic actually, that he was actually killed by one of these people that he felt he owed something to, who he was trying to right this wrong for. But I really liked what that person who killed Hull said, is you did not learn forgiveness. And I think it was very telling, even crucial to explain Hull's character. For him, it was about revenge. It wasn't about justice. It wasn't about obtaining justice for all these cultures that he helped to destroy. It was about payback, basically. I also found his relationship with Seren Pedak really sad as well. I think she was right that he was lost, a lost soul, someone who will not come back from the decisions he's made and who will continue to make one bad decision after another. Their failed romance was perhaps expected. Seren came across as a very intelligent, intuitive person who, whilst could be torn in her loyalties, would ultimately try to do what she thought was the right thing. She was a much more moral character, I felt, than Hull ever was. Yeah, and I really liked her character, actually. I'd like to see more of her. And boy, did I love the Crimson Guard. I want to know so much more about them. I want to know who they are. How do they get to travel through time? Because they have. Are they from the past or the future or both? How is this Crimson Guard organisation set up? What does it mean to be an avowed? I have so many questions about the Crimson Guard, and I really hope I learn more about them in the future books. But I loved the relationship that they built with Seren. The friendships in all of these books are some of my favourites. I love watching friendships growing, developing organically, naturally, between perhaps very different people. And yet you can see that bond slowly growing, developing, evolving. I just wanted to also touch on briefly on Seren and her role as, and I have no idea how it's supposed to be pronounced. Is it Aquita or Aquitor? Could be either, right? Thinking on it, I'm wondering if she could be considered like an ambassador, because she is neutral in any discussions or negotiations. I found, though, her unrequited feelings for Hull sad on some level, but I also came to the conclusion, even before he decided to align with the Edur, that I think she was better off without him. I never really took to Hull, I have to admit. I much preferred Bryce. He seemed very noble and clear-eyed in many ways about what was going on, and also extremely loyal to the crown and his role. And I loved his friendship with the Cedar, Karen Kwan. It seems such a strange friendship. Here we have this much older man, very vague and yet obviously highly intelligent and knowledgeable. And then we have Bryce, who is very upright and almost uptight in some ways. But I loved that they had such a close bond. And I loved that despite the fact that his brother Hull was probably a traitor to Letherii, despite the fact that his brother Tihol might have almost toppled the economy of Letherii, his loyalty was first to them. Yeah. Tihol. I absolutely loved Tihol. That was one of my favourite parts in this book, is reading the passages between him and Bugg. I loved the humour so much, and I was surprised at just how funny Erikson can be. In some ways it was almost slapstick, and yet I felt it was necessary in this book. And I absolutely loved the character of Shirk. Is that right? I don't know how to pronounce it. The dead woman who he had to drag out of the brothel. Yeah, she was hilarious actually. And I absolutely loved her relationship with Kettle. Kettle was always such a mystery throughout this book. And I have such curiosity about the, I know I'm going to get this wrong, Forkrul Assail. We met them before. We met them, I think it was with Casa. So that would have been in House of Chains. And this is the second time we've met them, and I think we meet them again later. I want to know so much more about them as well. There's still so much to learn about this world. It's like Erikson keeps adding these other elements, and yet some of them he has discussed in previous books. He just hasn't given us much information. I really did love the parts in Letherii and getting to view how this society worked, what it valued, what it didn't value, just like we saw with the Edur. Whilst the Letherii were looking to conquer the Edur for their resources, which I cannot admire. What actually did occur was in some ways even worse. So I guess we should talk about Rhulad, right? And the Crippled God. Wow. When Rhulad was killed, I'll be honest, it didn't occur to me that he was going to be resurrected. But when he was killed and he ended up on the island with the Crippled God, I thought, oh no, he's going to come back. And he's going to be powerful because he's going to come back. I guessed he was going to be resurrected, but I thought he was going to be resurrected and whole. That whole scene with him actually coming back to life, covered in, what was it, wax and gold and coins, having parts of his body stuffed with, I think it was hot wax. The pain that he endured during his resurrection was heartbreaking. It was just really hard to read about anyone, even a character I despised, suffering such pain. And it didn't happen to him once. It didn't even happen to him twice. As I said earlier, I felt more sympathy for this character than I ever expected to. His was the most tragic story, actually, throughout this book. And then he becomes emperor. This immature, arrogant, selfish child was made emperor of the whole Edur. And he's not looking to just push back the Letherii, he's looking to conquer them, to bring back their former glory. When the Edur started their advance against the Letherii, there was one particular scene with these columns of smoke that just decimated an army. It was horrific to read about this almost instant extinction of life. So many killed in an instant. And it reminded me of how wars have evolved, not necessarily for the better, over the centuries, over millennia. It used to be that people would have a battle with swords where you see your enemy up close. And now we can actually annihilate an entire culture, country, place with a push of a button where you don't even get to see what actually happens unless you see it on a screen somewhere. It's become so impersonal, which I think in some ways makes it easier. And yet that scene with these columns where instant death was meted out to all these soldiers who never even got a chance to fight. For me, that just underscored how war is the worst thing that we have ever invented, and that it is the worst thing we do to each other. I felt there was a very strong anti-war sentiment in this book, just as there has been in many of the others. And what occurred to the Letherii is tragic in itself, but also what is happening to the Edur. They have become almost unrecognizable. They become more concerned about conquest rather than a moral life. And yet up to then, I'd always seen them as more moral than the Letherii. That scene where they were abusing Trull, I think, showed me that this is what happens in war. People become monsters because it is acceptable, because the enemy is everyone. People allow the baser side of their nature free rein. Those kinds of scenes you didn't really see or read about prior to this war starting. But they have this ruler, this emperor, Rhulad, who's looking to conquer this known world, so anything goes. It just shows you the dark side of human nature, I guess. That's what I felt this book did. It really showed me both the best in human nature as well as the worst. The best in Trull, for example, who always tried to do the right thing, to be just and fair, even to a demon. To Trull, who was helping all of those who were stricken in poverty, who would ensure that he could get them out of the city. who lived the most humble life. In some ways, he even reminded me of a monk who had all these riches to spare and who would prefer to spend them on helping families suffering rather than on himself. Bryce, I felt, was a mirror for fear, both honourable, both wanting to do the right thing. Hull? Is Hull like Rhulad? I don't know if they're meant to be mirrors of each other. Perhaps. I'm not sure. Though Rhulad... See, Rhulad is a really complex character. Someone I hated, but obviously does not want to be in this position that he's in, where he has this crippled God, whispering in his ear, who is resurrecting him over and over again, even though he doesn't want to be, who suffers pain all the time. He started to show some maturity. The fact that he allowed Mayan to leave him, the fact that he regretted his decision to take Mayan as his wife, the fact that he wanted it to end, that he kept begging the crippled God to kill him. And the crippled God utilizing him as his tool, the sword maker, utilizing all these tools in this world for his own ends. See, I don't feel he is as villainous as we are led to believe. Is it surprising that he's looking to obtain his freedom? Is it surprising that misery loves company? I loved Bugg, absolutely loved him, and he's very different to the character of Mal, which was so well done. I had a feeling that Bugg had to be a god. He knew too much. He knew too much about the Jagots and the Forkrul Assail, the Azath houses, things like that. I still don't know enough about the Azath houses and how they work, but anyway, I really liked that we're only towards the latter part of the book given hints that perhaps Bugg was not who he thought he was. And I just loved the relationship he had with Teal and so many others. The one thing I did not like about this book is I still don't know who actually chained Trull. I know he calls them brothers, and I actually did go back and reread the prologue in House of Chains. It's never clear who actually chained him. Was it one of his actual brothers or was it someone else? Surprising though that despite him having the gravest concerns about, or voicing I should say, the gravest concerns about Rhulad having power as an emperor, he was the one who had the most compassion for Rhulad, even though he probably liked him the least out of all the brothers. When my battery dies, I know I've been talking too long, so I'm going to have to finish up here soon. I wanted to mention a couple more things before I get into the summary for the book. Near the end, when Trull said that he has to stay with Rhulad because he needed somebody to help him since Udinaas disappeared on them, he displayed the most compassion, I think, of all the characters in this book. And it reminded me why I loved him so much in House of Chains. He was, in some ways, always the doubter, always the doomsayer, and yet he also saw more clearly, I think, than any of his other brethren, any of his other Tist Edur. He was also horrified at the betrayal of the Tist Andai and the enslavement of the shadows. I'm wondering too, will these shadows eventually be released or not? Is that something that is going to play out in future books? And of course, Silch's ruin. It wasn't hard to guess that it was him who was trapped in the Azath house, because we knew that Blood Eye had trapped him there. But it wasn't clear until right at the end that it was him. I'm curious about the woman who was trying to get out with him. Who the hell is that? That's the thing with these books. Erikson lays all these, I don't know what to call them, Easter eggs, hints about future books perhaps, which leave you wondering, speculating. Who's this woman? Who are the Crimson Guard? How the hell did they get into this time when they are obviously from another time? What's going to happen with Kettle? What's going to happen with that great group on this pirate ship of Shirks? I want to see their adventures as well. I don't know if we will, but I want to see more of them. And the Tobakai cast as forebearers, I'm assuming. Are they identical or just similar? The Tobakai in Midnight Tides are terrifying. They really are. Despite the fact that I don't like the Letherii, they have a law apparently where they equate not paying a debt with murder, and I think that says everything about their culture. I still find it hard to see the devastation that war causes to the people. Bryce and the king in that final scene, which was very poignant. Here we have this very courageous, chivalrous man, Bryce, who basically took Rhulad apart so skillfully, so well. We had been told he was the king's champion for a reason, but seeing that was wonderful. And then he dies by poison. Now, part of me did wonder if Hanan Mossag and, is it Nefardus, the king's advisor eunuch, had set that up, that they would all take poison. It just seems such a tragic waste that this very chivalrous man, Bryce, had to die that way. I hated it. And that scene with Rhulad begging somebody to kill him so he doesn't have to continue suffering pain. That broke my heart as well. And who the hell is the Guardian? So many questions, always questions after the end of these books. Finally, I wanted to mention the last line in the book where Mal was saying he has to go and beat up a god. I can see some people liking that scene. I personally was appalled. This is a god who is chained, who is crippled, who is suffering pain. I don't even know if he can defend himself against this other god. But that is not an equal fight to me. And obviously what the Crippled God did do throughout this book, manipulating all these different people, these tools, I still don't feel dislike for this character. I can understand why he's manipulating everyone. He wants to escape. He wants to be free. You cannot blame him for that. So I don't hate him. And I don't like the idea of someone who is not chained, not suffering pain, not crippled, beating up on someone weaker. I really dislike that, actually. All right. I'm sure I've left things out. I always do. You guys know that. Perhaps one day I will do a video where I touch on those things that I didn't get to discuss in these videos, but that's not until I finish all of the books, I don't think. So let's go into the summary. I really liked Midnight Tides. I loved the writing, the humour. Some scenes were so beautifully written, so evocative. And I loved the themes that it explored about history, not always being accurate, about what value do we place on cultures, on people. Why are we putting the value of things, of money, above people? Poverty, exploitation, betrayal, and compassion. If any, I think this book is the one that evoked the most compassion in me for characters who I didn't think I could feel sorry for, such as the Crippled God, such as Rhulad. And whilst I loved the humour, I found this a very tragic story for some of the actual characters themselves, like Rhulad, and for also these two countries, these two cultures. I find any destruction of a culture tragic, and I would argue that Rhulad's plan to conquer this world is going to eventually lead to the destruction of the Edur. It usually does. Whilst I really did love many things about this book, like I love all of the books, I will admit though, this was not my favourite. Though there are some characters that I absolutely adored because they were so memorable, either because they were funny or because they were tragic. But it's very different to the first 4 books in this series. It could almost be a separate book entirely, a separate series entirely about the history of this world, about things that have happened in the past, which obviously are going to have ramifications for the events that we're reading about in the present. Well, now that I've finished this video, I'm definitely going to be starting the next book, but I've been advised to read Knight of Knives first. I think that is a short story or novella by Esselmont, and it features characters who also appear in Bone Hunters. You guys, though, will not be seeing a video on Bone Hunters until next year. So as for a score, it is always difficult to score these books because tomorrow I might have a different score to today. But for today, I'm going to call this a very good book. And if I had to give it a numeric value, I'm going to give it 7 to 7.5 out of 10. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. Now, of course, I want to hear from all of you. Tell me what you thought of this video, of my thoughts on the book. Tell me what your thoughts are. You know, I always want to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate that you put up with these very long videos. And if you liked it, then you know what to do. You can like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I hope you all have a beautiful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Is there any water left? Of course not. You destroyed everything. You worked up a sweat, did you? Ah, you're in play mode. Okay. That's really interesting. Am I bothering you because I'm talking?